This is Jelani Cobb, Kimberly Crenshaw. I'm Nikole Hannah-Jones. Thank you all for coming out to this talk that I put together on Black political power. I thought it was very important in this moment to address what's happening nationally to our people. We are here in Louisiana, a state that since Reconstruction has only had 2 Black people ever sent to Congress from the state of Louisiana since Reconstruction, despite this being a state where nearly 1 out of 3 residents is Black. We are in the middle of, oh, and by the way, they want to eliminate one of those Black seats. We are in the midst of the most wide-scale attack on civil rights in a century by the most openly white nationalist administration of our lifetime. The Supreme Court has struck down decades-old federal limits on how much money campaigns can coordinate to raise for political candidates, just further opening the door for the overtaking of our democracy by the oligarchy. And of course, the Supreme Court just struck down kind of the final provision of the Voting Rights Act designed. I've never lived under a country that did not have a strong Voting Rights Act, where they ruled that intentionally Black congressional districts are unconstitutional. And of course, law enforcement has also, or the Supreme Court has also ruled that law enforcement can stop people for immigration checks just based on how they look. So on the one hand, they're saying you can't use race if it might help Black folks, but you can use race if it's going to harm people of color. And the court just handed down a ruling upholding birthright citizenship, but it was a split ruling on something that shouldn't have even came before the Supreme Court. So while we can celebrate that birthright citizenship is not ended, it seems to me, both of you, as 2 preeminent scholars in this country, that the court upheld birthright citizenship while creating an America where that citizenship decreasingly has value, where the citizens have fewer and fewer rights that the court will uphold and fewer ways to actually access that citizenship. So I'd like you to begin just talking about this political moment that we're in. I've written that we're in the Second Nadir, that we're in for a long haul struggle. And so I really would like you both to kind of set the stage of where we are in the country right now. I'll start with you, Dr. Crenshaw, then I'll come to you, Jelani. Or excuse me, Dr. Cobb.
Dr. Cobb.
Jelani is fine.
Y'all earned them credentials now.
Well, we, as you say, Nikole, we are in the middle of the end of the second Reconstruction. What does that mean? That means that the laws, the rights, the struggle, the infrastructure that was created to deal with the shadow of segregation, to deal with the reality that we were enslaved people and that enslavement stretches across the generations even to now, is actively being dismantled. By dismantled, I mean they're undermining the Voting Rights Act. So the actual law that made it possible for us to fight against the efforts to weaken our political power, to push us out of the political equation, has basically been gutted. So that does not exist anymore as a backstop against what power has always tried to do, which is diminish our effectiveness, diminish our power, and push us back. The recent case that you mentioned, which is birthright citizenship, that very attack on birthright citizenship is really an attack on the legacy of African Americans. African Americans fought for the right to be citizens because our citizenship was denied by the Supreme Court in Dred Scott. Why? Because we were enslavable people. And because we were enslavable people, the founders, the court told us, never intended for us to ever be citizens. Ever be citizens. So one of the consequences of the winning of the Civil War was the 14th Amendment that said if you were born on this soil, you are American citizens. Well, this recent case was the Trump administration's effort to peel that back, to say, well, not so fast. There are some people who are born on American soil who will not be American citizens. For a lot of people, they might think, well, this is not about us because nobody is challenging our citizenship. But think about it. It is the first step toward unraveling the entirety of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. But more fundamentally, it undermines the legacy of black freedom struggle. Because when we struggled and the things that we won, it wasn't just one for us, it was one for everybody. So part of the challenge that we're facing right now is that anti-blackness is the corrosive cancer that's undermining our entire democracy. And at the same time, anti-blackness is the thing that nobody wants to talk about, including our political power, including our political parties, and including the media as well. So we have to really fight this with an understanding that every erosion of our democracy comes back to our legacy. If we don't fight to protect our legacy, number one, the nation is going to be lost, but we're basically going to be marginalized in this whole process, which is exactly what is happening now.
So I want to start by saying that we are here in Louisiana where the Plessy v. Ferguson case was centered, the case that codified segregation, that made it possible, made segregation the law of the land. The argument was that it was consistent with the Constitution of the United States. We came from all over the country. We would ask for a shout out. We would probably have nearly every state represented in this convention hall today. This is important. And there are reasons why this is important. So when I talk to my students, and I'll say, why was it that Louisiana and Mississippi and South Carolina were so dedicated to the premise of preventing black people from voting? And they'll say, oh, well, they were racist. Well, yeah, but it was racism everywhere. Why were those states so fixated on making sure that black people could not exercise the rights of citizenship? And the answer was the most obvious one. It's because there were a lot of us. Yep. We were looking at Mississippi with 50% black population, and Louisiana at the time with 40% black population, and South Carolina with 51% black population. That is an electorate. That is power. And so when those avenues were closed off and black people began migrating to other parts of the country in the midst of World War I and World War II and all the things that we know about where our ancestors came from. My people came from Hazelhurst, Georgia. If you heard of it, it means you're my cousin. My people came from Bessemer, Alabama. They came to New York. My parents met in Harlem. We all got some version of that story. Any of us who are outside the South got some version of that story. Let me tell you why that is important right now. When we had that sit-in at the Woolworth's counter in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1960, and we start the sit-in movement demanding integration and equal access to services. And this is at a Woolworth's in Greensboro. And individually, who cares? There's a bunch of coloreds who are trying to eat at this counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. The problem is that Woolworths also had a branch in Brooklyn, and the black people weren't going there. And they had a branch in Milwaukee, and the black people weren't going there. And then the store manager in Philadelphia is like, oh, hold on. Seems like there's not many black people in here. I walked past the Target pavilion the other day, this morning, by the way. That's neither here nor there.
It's here and there. It's here and there.
But the fact is that black people who were in places that were not being directly impacted were willing to fight on behalf of black people who were in the places that were. We have to go back to the history books.
Yes.
Because Adam Clayton Powell, I am from New York. Adam Clayton Powell, who was the first black congressman from New York, was answering letters from people in Mississippi. He was answering letters from people in Alabama. He was answering letters from black people in Georgia. That we will have to, as a community, leverage every ounce of influence, every ounce of power, every ounce of organizing ability that we have in defense of those of us who are fighting for our political lives in the places where this is happening. And it is simply that. When Martin Luther King said the subtitle of that book was Chaos or Community, we're either a community or we will collapse into chaos.
That's right. You see why I had them up here? You see that? Because again, we can come here, we can party, we can have a good time. That's great and necessary. But outside of these walls, they have a very ugly future planned for us. I want to quickly help us understand birthright citizenship. That comes because black folks who have been born in this country for generations were stateless people. We had no rights of citizenship in the only country that we ever knew. So I know a lot of black folks, I have seen the discourse saying this doesn't have anything to do with us. We're not from immigrants. They can't strip our citizenship. What America are you living in where you think your rights are secure? Just because we have it now, trust and believe, they plan on denaturalizing people who have been here for generations, and those people look like we do. We also have to understand that you can't have a racist apartheid country and democracy at the same time. So democracy requires racial justice. And so the fight against racial justice is a fight against democracy. We also need to realize that those two things are intertwined. Now, I want us to talk about, you started touching on it a bit, Jelani, because I also think those of us, I saw this after Trump first got elected, and some of us thought we were in safe states. Well, I live in New York, or I live in Illinois, and those things are not going to come to me. I think they're going to challenge electoral maps in a place like Illinois, in a place, right, like New York, that are also black majority electoral maps. So can you help people understand that it doesn't matter where you live in the country, there's a pattern. And we know that they're not just going to come for the rights in the South, and we shouldn't dismiss the South. Half of our people live in the South.
That's right. Can I say one thing in addition to this? Notice how the conversation around immigration changed. When Donald Trump ran in 2016, he said he was going to pursue people who were in the country illegally who had committed crimes.
Right.
And he's telling people, our issue is with people who are committing, as he said, the Mexican rapists. That's what he said at the beginning. And that we have to get these people who are undocumented, people who are in the country illegally. And then that changes, and it stops just being people who have committed crimes, according to them, but they have to go get people who are in the country illegally, period. And then when we look at ICE and what has happened in the second administration, they are going after people who are in the country legally. And the objective now, I work in higher education, is to make it more difficult for people even to come here to attend an American university. This is an agenda of attempting to re-whiten America. That is what the concern is. But lest we think, first off, there's a whole bunch of Haitian brothers and sisters who were impacted by this. When people are saying that our community is not impacted by this, we got black people from Jamaica who were impacted by this. We got black people from throughout the entire Caribbean and Latin America who are impacted by this. But the other part of it is, when we get to the birthright citizenship issue, the reason that the 14th Amendment is written in the way that it is because John Bingham, who framed that document, understood that this was going to apply to other communities. Go back and read Frederick Douglass and his speech about what was being done to the Chinese. This man was a former slave, but he understood that what was being done to the Chinese was a template for what could be done to black people. And when they began challenging the 14th Amendment, the minute that the 14th Amendment was on the books, this attempt to undermine what the 14th Amendment created is not new. They began trying to challenge that from the minute that amendment was ratified. And one of the first places you saw that it began to be challenged was in the rights of the Chinese in California. And so if we want to imagine that this is some sort of issue that's going to leave us unscathed. It will not. And if we are wise, we will take an example from what we have seen in Minnesota and how people came out night after night after night in defense of people whom they considered their neighbor. And so this is the crucial thing for us. It's great for us to have a good time. You all have to be having a good time. But let's be very clear that our community is under attack, and we have to be ready to stand up.
So of the cases that we all have been talking about, I think one of the most important things that slips our consciousness is the role of our own politics in contributing to the possibility of unraveling the protections that we have. So Nikole started off with the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, with the gutting of campaign finance reform, with the contemporary undermining of constitutional protections. One of the things that's so important to recognize is that those were 5-4 decisions. Yep. Who was that fifth vote that made it possible to gut the crown jewel of the civil rights movement? It was Clarence Thomas. Who was the fifth vote that undermined affirmative action? It was Clarence Thomas. Who was the fifth vote that said police can use the claim of traffic violations for race-specific, targeted, driving while black harassment? It was Clarence Thomas. Now, let me take you back to what got Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court. Now, I don't want to undermine all of the anti-blackness that is already part of the mix. But let's think about Clarence Thomas was affirmed to the Supreme Court with the support of the African American community.
That's right.
Where did that support from the African American community come from? When did the support from the African American community turn into a political power move that put a far right winger on the Supreme Court that now has come to undermine our democracy? It happened when Anita Hill came forward. It happened when Anita Hill said, "This is what happened to me." It happened when Clarence Thomas was able to wrap his anti-blackness in a tale of a high-tech lynching.
Yep.
Black people fell for the lie that tell the truth, because people heard it and they said, okay, I know this story, because this is the story about how anti-blackness is narrated to ourselves. And it's not that the lynching is not an important part of our history, because it is, but it's not the only part of our history. The way black women have experienced anti-blackness through sexual assault, sexual abuse. Sexual abuse has been a condition of our lives since we arrived on these shores. Enslavement was industrialized sexual abuse, but it's something that we never talked about. We never talked about what had to be believed about black women to breed us. We never talked about what had to be believed about our mothering to take our children away. We never talked about how our being written as people who are not fully human has been a part of how black women have been imagined, and it's never been interrupted. So that's part of the zeitgeist. That's part of the environment that allowed Clarence Thomas to basically say, support me, not her. Allowed black people to think sexual harassment is not something that black women worry about. Allowed our people to think that when a black woman says something about being sexually abused or harassed, she's acting like a white woman. In fact, there was actually an op-ed that said, even if Clarence Thomas did all the things that she said he did, she's still lying, because black women know how to take that stuff. Black women have a lower standard for sexual abuse. So because we believed that, we did not have a way of understanding that she was talking about our lives. We didn't have a way of repudiating this far-right winger in favor of a black woman who was telling our story. So what now has happened? Not only have black women been marginalized, not being able to tell a story in a community and be believed, not only have black people suffered because the civil rights infrastructure was undermined by Clarence Thomas, our entire nation is now in the grip of an authoritarian regime that is taking away the few protections that we fought and bled for to maintain. So the main point is when we say believe black women, trust black women, it's not just for us. It's not just for black people. It's for people of color. It's for the democracy. And quite frankly, if this thing goes down, the rest of the world goes down with it. We're seeing wars all over the place because these people are in office. So we have to think intersectionally when we think about the responsibilities we have to each other. We have to think about putting black women into the narrative of what this country is about, because if we're not in the narrative, we've lost the story.
Powerful. I mean, you already know how much I love your mind. But we have to be able to break this information down in a way that regular folks can understand. You don't have to get a college degree to understand what Jelani and Kimberly are talking about. I just want to do a quick poll. How many of y'all were born after 1968? Okay, so if you were born after 1968 like I was, then you've actually never lived in the country that they're bringing forth. You were born into a country where, because of the battles of our ancestors, you had equality in the law. You had affirmative action. You had Roe v. Wade, right? You had a federal administration that, even if it didn't actually believe in equality, at least espoused the values publicly of equality. And do y'all remember a few years ago when it was in vogue for folks to be like, I am not my ancestors?
Right.
Absolutely fucking right. 100%, right? Because everybody here who thought what they wouldn't have taken back then, oh, I wouldn't have let them water hose me. Oh, I wouldn't have let them whip me. What are y'all doing right now? Y'all shopping in the Target line. At Essence Festival, you can't even boycott one store. So what I would like to know, and look, I always assume if you ask me to speak, I may never get invited back again. Because I'm going to tell the truth wherever I am. I don't care, right? The stakes are too high for us to be worried about a paycheck and not be worried about our rights. So what I would like how much time I got? Okay, I'm going to ask one final question. We have ancestral knowledge that we need to tap into. The ancestors that we said we are not have actually fought against the thing that we are not prepared to fight against. So I would love both of you, as kind of our final remarks, to tell us, what can we learn from our ancestors in order to prepare us to do battle? And y'all, it's a long battle. I need us to be very clear. You don't lose your rights from the Supreme Court and get them back in the next election. Some of these rights are lost for generations, but we have ways where our people fought when we got to the same place before. So to close us out, I'm gonna start with you, Kim, and I'll end with you, Jelani. Tell us, what do we need to draw from our ancestors in this moment?
Well, you put your finger on it. This is not a fight about this is not about the midterms. This is not about the next presidential election. We are in a fight for the future of the century. Our ancestors, if they could speak to us, would tell us we were in exactly this position in 1876. We were exactly in this position when we were effectively written out of the equation. We were in the same situation where there was a counter-revolution against everything we had fought for and won. And you know what? When we lost for 7 decades. Yep. 7 decades we lived under racial tyranny. For 7 decades, the faction of this country that would rather destroy it rather than share it with us was running the table. So what they would tell us is that everything they're trying to take away from you right now, it's valuable because it is the key to our future. It is the key to our survival. So when they want to take away our vote, don't let them tell you that voting isn't important, because if it wasn't important, they wouldn't have been spending millions of dollars to take it away from you. When they're trying to take away our books, censor us out of the narrative, take over the colleges and the universities, even K through 12 education, go after our concepts like structural racism, anti-blackness, have a whole list of 100 words that cannot be said in the federal government, which are all about our ability to narrate our story. When they are spending time and money to take it away, it's telling us this is what we need to survive. So if we're not showing up at school board meetings when they try to take critical race theory, black studies, intersectionality, anything out of the curriculum, we are giving them our power. When we don't show up at the community hearings, when we're not showing up at City Hall, when we're not showing up at City Council, it's not just the presidential election. That's once every 4 years. This stuff is happening every day. So if we don't want to contribute to our own disenfranchisement, we've got to make this costly. And the only way we make it costly is to fight back. No anticipatory compliance, no letting them make us go lower and lower. Every time we give up something, they come back and say, okay, what more can we take? We've got to draw a line in the sand and say this and no more. We are pushing back with everything we have.
Thank you. Jelani, they're giving me the double eye on both sides, that side and that side, so you got 1 minute.
I'm going to say this in 1 minute. Look, our enemies have studied us. We have studied them, but they have spent a lot of time studying us. And you look at what has happened in this administration. They went after, look at what's happening right now in these rulings around the Supreme Court and the Federal Reserve. That ruling is about an attempt to remove a black woman, Lisa Cook, a black economist, from the Federal Reserve. When they came in, they removed Carla Hayden, black woman, Librarian of Congress. They just are defaming and attacking Elizabeth Alexander, who is the head of the Mellon Foundation, black woman. They understand what black women contribute to the black community. And that by attacking black women, you facilitate immobilizing the rest of the community. This is about our self-interest. We need to examine, we had a tradition in this country from 1830 to 1901, the Colored Convention movement, where black people gathered to say, how do we get free? The first thing was, do we have to leave the country? Is it possible to even fight for freedom in this country? We need to look at that. We need to gather, we need to set agendas, and we need to be real about what we are fighting against. This is not a question about the next election. This is a question about what kinds of conditions you want your children as adults to live in. This is a question of what kinds of conditions you want your grandchildren to be born into. And just as there were those people who in 1964 and 1965 and 1968, when those cornerstone pieces of civil rights legislation came into existence, they came on the backs of people who died before they were ever signed. We have to be prepared to do something that we will not see in our lifetimes. But we will know that the next generation and the generation after that will be the beneficiaries of the things that we were willing to fight and die for.
Jelani Cobb and Kimberly Crenshaw, please show them appreciation. Thank y'all.